This is Ed Szymanski, and we're civil trial attorneys. And what we do is we represent victims or survivors of childhood sex abuse. Criminal court, the criminal action is focused on the perpetrator, not necessarily on the victim. They're focused on punishing the perpetrator for what the perpetrator did. Whereas in the civil system, what we're focused on is holding the perpetrator and institution accountable by verdicts, by monetary judgments. I'm going to talk to you today how big verdicts, 7- and 8-figure verdicts, can affect change within the organizations that serve our youth. What you're going to hear about today is a case that we took to trial in San Jose a number of years ago. And it's a case that ultimately affected, it's a very large verdict, $30 million verdict, that affected change up in Santa Clara County and how they operated their foster care program. So I want to take you back to the early 1990s, and Santa Clara County had outsourced its foster care program to what's called the Foster Family Agency. And they basically paid this private entity, this foster family agency, to recruit foster parents, to screen them, and to supervise them in order to make sure that the children are safe. So the original outfit, the original FFA, Foster Family Agency, that was hired by the county was an outfit by the name of Daybreak. And Daybreak did it for a couple years, and they sold to an outfit called Giotto. Problem is, Giotto had no experience whatsoever in operating a foster care program. And we know that because we got documents in the beginning of the lawsuit, and the purchase agreement had a consulting agreement in it, and they admit that they have zero experience in operating a foster care program. It says, whereas Giotto wishes to expand its programs in the state of California and those counties north of San Luis Obispo County to include the foster family programs for children, and whereas the operation of foster care programs requires considerable expertise in a number of technical areas, and whereas Giotto does not have that expertise and therefore requires the services of an expert in order to operate the foster care programs. They recruit foster parents, and they recruited a guy by the name of John Jackson. And Jackson was not a good dude. In fact, he was a very bad dude. They did a cursory background check, which is fingerprints, which 99% of these cases, they come back clean. But listed on his application was a number of references that included his ex-wife. Had they bothered to call the ex-wife, they would have found a number of interesting things about Mr. Jackson's past. Because Mr. Jackson had been previously reported to the Mountain View Police Department for beating his son with a whip. He had previous suicide attempts and a psychiatric hospitalization, a history of drug abuse. He had threatened others with guns. He had been discovered inappropriately touching the genitals of the infant son. He kicked his first wife in the stomach in an effort to get her to abort the child. Had a drinking problem. And he had told others he'd attempted suicide. But this is the guy that Giotto screened and ultimately allowed to be a foster parent. A 10-year-old boy, our client, Jason, this is him. Jason, at the time when he was 10, was living with his biological parents, but there were problems in the home front. Parents were fighting. There was physical fighting involved. There was alcohol involved. So he was removed from his biological parents' house and placed in the Jackson house. Frying pan into the fire. Because 2 weeks after being placed in that Jackson house, 10-year-old Jason woke up one night with his pants around his ankles, and John Jackson orally copulated him. And that 10-year-old boy was terrified. Jackson was a 6'2", 220-pound man that was down between that 10-year-old boy's legs in doing something that Jason had never even thought of, heard of, and he was terrified. He didn't know what to do. But he didn't say anything. The problem is, it only got worse, because after that, Jackson began forcing Jason to orally copulate him. And it got worse, because there were other little kids in that house, ages 5 to 8, and he would force all of them to have sex with one another. And he would film it. And he forced Jason to dress up like a little girl. And he would have sex with Jason. And this went on 3 to 4 times a week for 4 years. We counted up as 585 times Jason was sexually abused in that house. Now, there was a person from Giotto who was supposed to be supervising this house, a guy by the name of John K. We're not going to use his name because I think he's still a licensed therapist in the state. John K. was not only responsible for the Jackson house and the kids in the Jackson house, but also a number of other foster houses, foster homes that Giotto operated. Problem is, John K. had a 40-hour-a-week job outside of Giotto. 5 days a week, 8 hours a day, he was working at his other job as a therapist. But yet he was supposed to check on these houses once a week. To check on the kids once a week. And we know from talking to the kids that didn't happen. And at trial, John K. got up at trial and said, I went to that house at least 300 times while Jason was there. I said, oh, really? Tell me about the house. Is it 1-story, 2-story? Oh, I don't remember. How many bedrooms? I don't remember. What do you see when you first walk in the front door? I don't remember. What color is the carpet? I don't remember. And the jury obviously got furious about that. But we also knew from the kids that the times he did show up, he would drink alcohol with Jackson. It'd be a Friday afternoon, and they'd be drinking beers together. Had he done the proper visits and gone in the kids' bedrooms, he would have seen the cameras set up to spy on the kids when they're dressing and undressing. Would have seen the sawed-off shotgun in the closet right next to the front door. But he didn't do it. Now, that's not the only thing that's happened at the Jackson house, because there were other little girls, as I mentioned, and boys in that house that were cycling through that house. And there was one girl by the name of Jennifer T. And she was 8 years old, and she was being sexually abused like the other kids by Jackson. But she's 20 years old now, and she had 3 different kids, 3 different men. She clearly has PTSD. You'll see it. But you see the lifelong consequences of being sexually abused as a child. You see it in her eyes. She's haunted. And in this clip we're going to show you, the defense attorney, who had no clue how to defend a sex abuse case, is questioning her about what she told Giotto back in the day and what she remembered happened to her. And this is Jennifer explaining to him that her memory, well, I'll show it to you real quick.
I understand your memory's not perfect. Tell me what you do remember.
I just remember touching. All that is him telling us what to do. But it's like a picture. Like standing over, and I have one picture of him just standing over me and my foster brother, and me and him were just looking at each other, and we both didn't want to do nothing. It's like a picture. It's not like you need, and then after that I don't remember. That's how come I think I just remember being outside the home.
When you are you talking about 2 different incidents here? Or, so let's focus on when you woke him up. I need to know what happened.
It's a picture. That's what I'm trying to tell you. It's just a picture. Maybe if you guys would have asked me when it happened and actually believed me, maybe you guys would have got the whole story. But it's just a picture. All I remember, like, like I said, it's a picture. It's not like a video.
So what she's saying is that she's blocked out what happened, and it's a picture. It's not like a video. But she goes on.
During that subsequent incident, did John Jackson touch you?
It's a picture. It's not a movie. If you wanted all the facts, you should have asked me when it happened. It should have been dealt with then. You guys would have got a lot more information out of me. Instead of telling me it didn't happen, it didn't happen, it didn't happen, it didn't happen, it didn't happen.
The
When
question
you're
is,
young and you say it so many times, I blocked it.
During the subsequent incident, do you recall John Jackson touching you?
I filmed. Can't tell you details. I feel it, and it's not okay. And I've already told them. You guys already have it probably in your guys' report what I told her. I probably didn't tell her everything because all she did was tell me I was lying. And I didn't want to get in trouble. So when she started asking me in front of him, I would just say, oh, no, I was lying, I was lying.
That's still tough for me to watch. But she's told she's lying. There's no report to the proper agencies. No further investigation. And once you got the professionals involved, once you got the people who are trained in interviewing victims of child sex abuse, they sent out a team. They interviewed the children in the house, all 5 of them, away from John Jackson. They developed a rapport with them, got them comfortable, and all 5 kids reported exactly what happened in that house, and Jackson's in prison for pretty much the rest of his life. But it wasn't over because Jason wanted to hold not only Jackson responsible, but wanted to hold Giotto responsible for failing to protect him for those 4 years of abuse. And so the insurance company for Giotto hired some hotshot LA firm, very arrogant, and was scorched earth litigation for almost 3 years. And they hid documents. They sued Jason. They actually sued Jason because we had another client, we represented Victoria, and they said that Jason contributed to her harm, even though Jackson was the one who was directing and telling him what to do as a 10-year-old. But they sued Jason. That caused a tremendous amount of trauma with him. They hired doctors to examine Jason and say there's no effect whatsoever. That 4 years of abuse had no effect on him whatsoever. They offered $25,000 to settle the case. And we said, okay, obviously going to trial. And the problem is, and Ed's going to talk to you in a little bit, Jason had never fully opened up about what happened in that house. He had a girlfriend. He never even told his girlfriend, never told his bio parents. We just knew snippets. We didn't know the breadth, the nature and extent of what happened in that house. And now at trial, he's going to have to get up in front of 12 people and with people in the gallery with the judge and tell his story. But he wouldn't talk to us.
So I met him about 4 weeks before he was going to go into the courtroom when the case was going to start, and he was probably going to testify a week or a week and a half in. Right before I met him, I was told that he wasn't talking. Okay. He wasn't, as Steve mentioned, he wasn't describing what had happened to him. So he wasn't telling his lawyers, he wasn't telling his therapist, he wasn't telling his girlfriend, and he wasn't telling his family members. The other thing I was told was that he had recently been examined by a psychiatrist, and he had a full diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder with his whole range of symptoms. He was molested between age 11 and 14, 4 years, about 600 times. From 14, he left the home, and he actually rejoined his father and then attempted to go through high school and to have a normal life. But at 21, he had to go back to the criminal courts and testify there. In the criminal case, there was no jury. It was just a judge. Okay? Then from 21, after that finished, he came and started to work with Steve and our group, and then he was going to testify in the civil case at 25. I've had a lot of things happen to me that are different, that causes me to feel different. I feel like I have to hide things that the average person hasn't had happen to them. He had had the experience of the criminal trial, but we were wanting him to get ready to deal with a civil trial. In the criminal trial, the focus, as Steve mentioned, is all on the perpetrator. And so the language is, he did this, he did that, I saw him do such and such, he touched me, and it's all he. In the civil case, the jury's being asked to determine how badly has this child been harmed and what can we do to make up for that harm. So the shift is from he to me. This is the law in the state of California in civil cases, and I think that most other states are fairly similar. There's an area called emotional damages. This is what the judge tells the jury that they have to do. He tells them verbally, or he or she, and also gives it to them in writing. So the judge says to the jury, you must decide how much money will reasonably compensate Jason for the harm that was done to him. You must include an award for each item of harm, and this is the legal system tries to come up with quote-unquote plain English language to give to a jury, and then the jury uses that language to make their determination. So these are the categories in California and probably most other states. The jury has to consider his physical pain from 11 to 25 and beyond, and for however long the psychiatrist said this is going to last, PTSD may last out over his lifetime. So his challenge was with the jury is if he opens up his insides and tells what happened to him. It wasn't that necessarily that on the first night my foster father came and did this to me. It's what did I feel? What did I feel as he was doing that to me? What did my body feel like? What were my emotions? How often did that come back in dreams? How often did that come back as I thought about it? How did it affect me over the next 14 years?
We put him up there, and you could hear a pin drop in that courtroom because the jurors had heard from the doctors that had seen him. They'd heard about his PTSD. They had heard from Jennifer T. They had heard about the horrors in that house. But now it's Jason's turn, and he got up there and he mustered up the courage, and he told his story. And I swear to you, I mean, I've tried a lot of these cases. We've tried a lot of these cases. And this one, that direct examination, I mean, it was so silent, so still. You could hear people breathing in between questions. It was amazing. But he did a great job. He actually knocked it out of the park. And he opened up. And that was, and I'll get to it later, but that was kind of the linchpin ultimately for what that verdict was. Because they heard from Jason. They heard his terrible story. But I want to go back to when we first got up there, we got to trial against this big LA firm. And we get there and the offer is $25,000. And of course that's a non-starter. And so we pick a jury. And then after opening, they realized they got a problem. We gave our opening statement. We told them what we're going to show. And defense attorney, that time, the insurance company adjuster is there now watching what's going on because they got some problems. We do our opening and they stopped and they said, Judge, we want to see if we can settle the case. And so I go back into chambers of the judge, and they said, we want to offer $1 million. And I say no. The judge scolds me and says, son, you know what county you're in? You're in Santa Clara County. We don't give away money. There's no seven-figure verdicts up here. You're not going to get a seven-figure verdict. Okay, Judge, thank you. I appreciate that. We're going to move on. After we rested our case in chief, insurance company adjusters watching every day. They got problems. Judge, we want to see if we can settle the case again. We want to offer $2 million this time. And I said, Judge, you know, we've told our story, and I don't think they can counteract anything we've said. I think they're dead in the water. And we don't want that $2 million. And so I came out of chambers, and our other jury consultant, Finley, is not here today, redheaded Scottish dude, kind of fiery. The jury wasn't in, it was out of session, so there were just insurance adjusters, attorneys and stuff in the courtroom. And Finley said rather loudly, hey, what'd they offer? What'd they offer? I said, $2 million. You go tell them to fuck themselves. I said, well, the insurance just is sitting right next to you, Finley. You can tell her, okay? Closing argument, the offer was $3 million. And we said no. And that jury was out about 4 hours. And they came back with the single largest verdict for a single plaintiff in a sex molest case in the state of California for $30 million. And the vote was 9-3. We only need 9-3, but I was wondering why it wasn't 12-0. And it turned out 3 people held out for more money. But what I saw and the power in that verdict was, I thought, and Ed can talk to us about this too, but it was very therapeutic for Jason. Because you had 12 members of the community who came in and listened to his story and said, no, you didn't do anything wrong. You did nothing wrong. The shame, in fact, doesn't belong with you. The shame belongs over there with Giotto and Jackson. And every single one of those jurors, there were tears. Every single one of those jurors hugged Jason afterwards. And so it was very, very emotional. But it was very, again, it kind of restored his faith in society, because what had happened was so bad that we had let him down so badly that when 12 people came in and said, you know what, it's not your fault, that really, really went a long way. The reason why we're here is, how did that verdict affect change? What happened then is Santa Clara County looked at that and said, holy shit. So they brought their foster care program back in-house, back to the professionals, back to the people who weren't incentivized to go out and recruit anyone to be a foster parent. And so it was then run by the county itself, and no more foster family agencies, no more Giotto. And to my knowledge, since then, they haven't had any problems. The whole industry watched. This is a big deal. It was in the papers. It was all over the news. And that whole industry, the foster care industry, watched what happened in that case. And what they did is, when that happens, you get a big verdict like that, the other foster family agencies, other counties will look at it. Well, wait a minute, what did they do that maybe we're doing? We want to make sure we're not doing what they did. We don't want to get pinched for $30 million. So they review their game plan, so to speak, to make sure they're not doing anything which would expose them. And if that verdict had been $100,000, there'd be no change. Absolutely no change at all, because $100,000 doesn't really mean a whole lot. And the only way we've seen it, things get changed, is when you hit them in the pocketbook, because money talks. And we know this because this is not the only large 8-figure verdict we've got in these sex abuse cases. We've got them against school districts, the largest one against LA Unified School District. And that was, what, 1 million? There's 1 million kids in that school district? 1 million children in that school district. And we had a 10-year-old little boy who was horribly abused by his 5th grade teacher. And similar facts. They tell us to go to hell, offers $25,000, $25,000. They go to trial, they bump up the offer. And we hit him for $23 million. And at that point, well, the first thing that happened is that LAUSD, because they've got other problems up there with sex abuse issues, and so they can no longer get insurance for sex abuse stuff. So they've got to, that's a big deal. But they also changed policies with respect to, without going into details, with respect to how they supervised their teachers and responded to complaints. Because a lot of times what will happen when the teacher, what's called pass the trash. Teacher will get, a complaint, and rather than address it, let us move to another school district or another school. And that's what happened in that case. And we've done it, Ed, we've done it in school districts, YMCAs, the drug and alcohol programs for teens. We've got the largest verdict against them. And it makes the industry take a look at what they're doing. The last slide is an example of organizations that are supposed to protect our youth that we've either made change in or I think we've sued pretty much everyone up there. So, because the predators go where the fishing's good. I mean, they don't go to the old folks' homes, they go to where the kids are. And if you look up there, that's where the kids are. And so that the only way they're going to make changes, real changes, is getting hit with a verdict. And we've seen it lately, though, where the insurance companies that insure these entities now require specific training on red flags, on reporting, and mandatory reporting, which they didn't have before, because the insurance companies are the ones paying these judgments. And so they're saying, well, if we're going to insure you, you're going to have every single one of your teachers, every single one of your educators undergo this training. The problem is a lot of times in the schools is that teachers will see red flags and they just don't want to believe that their colleague is a sexual abuser. Yeah, see? They don't want to believe it, so they don't report it. And we see that constantly. The training's good, the training's there, but they just don't implement it, you know? They don't implement the playbook.